somebody just get up and sit down again? Rihanna, were you getting something out of your backpack?
Yeah. Cedric ain't here none. And we start class. We are about to make a transition. Unit 0 is introducing my class, whereas Unit 1 is introducing the science. So I've been working so far on some ways to think about this stuff and like the philosophical framework under which we're going to look at that content. So, you know, we've had a couple of days of like paperwork and how we do stuff and how you turn in paper and get paper stamped and take papers and so on. And there have been some homework deadlines, but really these have been sort of like practicing for the real world, not really mission critical. So right around this time every year, I make a singular and very specific extension. The Unit 0 homework, meaning everything due until today, you can turn in any time before the exam. If you didn't do the Happy Fishing Post Lab, if you didn't do the graphing or the signature or the EDU sign up, go ahead, no big deal. Starting tomorrow, that really is getting to the nitty-gritty. That's the time where the logic of being prepared for that day starts to make more sense. And so, starting tomorrow, there are no more extensions or anything, but homework 0, anything in Unit 0, that homework you can turn in the next week anytime. Questions about that? I don't even have a grade book yet, so it's no skin off my back. Regarding the Facebook group, I've noticed a couple of students trying to join last year's groups, which are 2013-14. It's very important. Those groups have been retitled old. I got to keep them together because sometimes I want to get in touch with all the kids from last year or something. But you see, 2014-15, make sure you write that in there. There's one for the class. We have about 40 members now, and that's great. And there's one for the Green Club. That one also has about 40 members. The Green Club has its first event this Sunday. 4 points extra credit is just around or over 10% on a test. It's like 1 letter grade bonus. And coincidentally, the stuff that they do is usually in nice places with beautiful, hip, environmental types. You can go perv out on college kids. So I strongly recommend joining the Green Club. They put all the waivers and all the directions on the website. You can contact people through that if you know that they're in your neighborhood and my mom's going to drive us or whatever. Yes? Ann?
Yeah, if you join the Green Club, you have to go every time they have.
You don't have to anything. What else? Yes.
Do you know what it is?
It's a Royal Hondo. How many of you know a Royal Hondo?
It's Henry's Beach, right?
No, that's a Royal
Burro. Yeah.
Royal Hondo is like up the coast from like Refugio to Higas, the next canyon. It's right before Mariposa Reina. So freedivers know that area. It's like on the Gaviota coast. And Royal Hondo is like a really beautiful old ranch that was made into like a wildlife easement or a wilderness easement. So it's in permanent conservation. And so they're like restoring this old ranch to like native habitat. There's like huge old trees and like clean water. There's trails that nobody's allowed to visit unless you volunteer. And then if you volunteer, it's like cool, and you can come lurk and you'll meet the guy that runs the space. So you can be like, hey John, can I go hike this next week with my mom? And they'll be like, yeah, come on in. And he'll like work it out with you. It's like private, nobody has access unless you volunteer, and then you're super hooked up. I recommend it very highly. It is heavenly. It's about a half-hour drive, so plan accordingly. Yeah.
Kind of close to Halls Ranch.
Yeah, it's like not quite that far. It's like 10 miles maybe before the ranch.
Kind of El Cap Canyon.
Yeah, it's like almost like pretty precisely halfway between El Cap and the ranch. Anybody else? Join the groups. How many of you went to the movie last night? How many of you liked the movie last night? Anybody have parents that would be interested in this sort of thing? Because if you do, please make sure that you or they reach Antara right away. She's only going to be able to do this for another week. And then we're going to hand it off to one of you or one of the other periods kids. And so Antara is going to make the master list of parents. And she can say, only February, only petroleum, only whatever you want. But have them reach her right away, please. I don't know if you know this, but I teach this class periods 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hello? Oh, that's me. Just give it a second. Fourth. Thank you. So where was I?
Missing classes.
Yeah, so if you miss a period, you can come to any other period. Like if you have a doctor's appointment, and then you're going to get here just in time for PE, it might be in your best interest to miss PE and not miss this class. Just saying. Not that I don't like PE, but you know, like if there's a class where you guys are watching a movie because there's a substitute, I'll write you a note that says you were on campus. You still got to manage your attendance because I can't mark you present in another period. Say, hey, English teacher, we're just watching the movie. Can I go to Jose's instead? And he'll write you a note to prove I'm here and you marking present. And then the teacher says, fine, present, and I'll write you the note, no problem. Because like I don't care. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to do that, but I'm just trying to make that available. You're welcome in all my periods. Remember also that you're supposed to be responsible for 3 things. What the Triad of the Commons is. Free sharing doesn't work because rational decisions degrade the resource. Everybody would like to have the benefit if the cost will be accrued anyhow. You got to be able to say that. Focus on the commons. Free sharing, unstructured sharing doesn't work. You also have to know the 2 possible solutions. You can make the resource into a lot of little private pieces to contain the costs, or you can make the resource into one giant shared big piece to spread around the benefit. This is what we call the privatization or the socialization of the resource. Problem is, the private property concept doesn't work for all the resources. You can't privatize the atmosphere or water. And also, there are some philosophical problems with privatization. You know, like, people can accumulate wealth, and unequal distribution of wealth can lead to unequal distribution of power, and feudalism can be kind of mean sometimes. You know, we hippies have some discomforts with that one. On the opposite end of the fence, you also can't socialize every resource. There's no way to make land something that everybody shares evenly. Someone has to live in the crappy spot, and someone has to live in the nice spot. So we can't share land, for example. You can't socialize all resources either. You can't make them all private, you can't make them all public. And again, there are some philosophical problems with the mutually agreed upon coercion, the idea that we're giving up our freedoms, and we all get a little uncomfortable with that concept. Nobody wants to give up all their freedoms. Government can really get too big, it's possible. So you must know strategy of the commons, 2 possible solutions, challenges of both of the solutions. Are there any questions about this? Just so you know, that is the only term that I will spend one whole day on. That is the only whole day concept in this class. So I really expect you to like fully be able to generate this from scratch. And so does the College Board. It's the most common AP test question. Are there any questions? Because if not, we do Easter Island. Let's do it. Similarity between the present and Easter Island. Anyway, please. Quicker. Yes.
We both deforested, or we both chopped down a lot of our trees, and it leads to deforestation.
Yes, and by the way, that is the first and simplest interpretation. The most like basic lesson you take away from this, and everybody must remember this simple issue. You cut down all the trees, you lose all the dirt, then you're screwed. That is true and correct. And as lessons to take away, that is like the very top. And if you scrape that aside, there might be a greater metaphor. Like by extension, that also could mean waiting. Slightly bigger picture. This could also be seen as
Strategy for comedy.
what?
Any of your resources?
Any of your resources. There's this thing called Earth Island. There's an institute called the Earth Island Institute, which is, hey, that whole thing is like Easter Island. And all the resources are like the trees, and if we're not careful, we're going to be screwed, in the big picture. And that's fine, and that's a valuable interpretation of this. But I got something else to think about. I want you all to realize what my job actually spiritually means to me. What this is actually like for me on the inside. I see brilliant, promising, beautiful young people at the peak of ripeness. Your potential and your sweetness are maximized. You're so cute and so promising, so perfect. And I will crush you with bad news for the next 20-odd weeks. 175 days of bad news are coming at you. You are perfect ripe fruit, and I will stomp on you. That's not easy for a man like me that likes to be relaxed and happy. I gotta give you a lot of bad news. Kids all come in all like fluttery and butterfly-y like all of you. All like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I'm like, you're gonna die! We're running out of fish, we're running out of water, we're running out of dirt, climate change, extinction. That's hard on a man. Like, you just gotta do this once. This is my 11th lap. I will retire in 2037. Yes, I'm keeping track. I got 23 laps to go. You could even have grandchildren mathematically by then. And I'll just be here delivering bad news to beautiful, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ripe fruit and crushing their dreams. It's difficult. So I have become obsessed with apocalyptica, like apocalypse fiction. Right around the time I started teaching this class, I read a lot. I'm a very avid reader. I digest books at an astonishing rate. And I've basically run out of apocalypse fiction, so I've kind of stopped reading. I've read like every major work of apocalyptic fiction since like the 1930s. When I look at Easter Island, I'm really curious about something else. What happens when societies fall apart? Like, what do we learn from the lives of those people that happen to be alive right at the end? Like, what did they do with the last tree? Like, put a fence around it? Did people come up and like make drawings of it and stuff? Like, we couldn't take pictures of it on camera. What did they do? Like, was it like a Like the wildlife refuge, like, oh, there's the last tree, everybody. Did somebody poach it? Did it just get cut down and nobody cared? Like people never caught on to the problem? They're like, oh, it's the last tree, no big deal. Like, I'm really curious about that. So that's the way I want to look at the story. You can call it Rapa Nui. Easter Island was the colonial name. That's also the name of the people. They're called the Rapa Nui. And this is the most remote inhabited place on Earth. It's 1,240 miles away from the closest island and more than 2,000 away from the closest mainland, which is Chile. It's almost 2,400 away, making it the most remote inhabited place on Earth. By the way, you can write down all the notes that are interesting to you, but this is not AP test worthy. This is the last of my philosophical framework for you. And sometime around 500 AD, so like 1,500 years ago, some Polynesian families paddled across the Pacific with a sail assisting them. Across the open ocean for weeks on end, eating fish and drinking rain off the sail, knocked sideways, sleeping on each other's laps, wearing helmets to avoid heat shock. They navigated by the stars. No modern instrumentation. Weeks and weeks and weeks across the open ocean. Like, yeah, we're going that way. This is blue. That nauseates me. Like, I think I'm a brave man. Like, I face my fears with no problem, but I don't think I could hang with that. I think I would snap. I would freak out. I'd lose my stuff. And they navigate the clouds and the currents in what's called the third wave of Polynesian expansion. The first wave left some part of Asia, and the Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese all fight to claim Polynesian ancestry. Everybody's like, no, Polynesians were ours, man. They were ours, because Polynesians are badass. Like, extremely badass. So first they spread to, like, the, what's that called? The West Asian archipelago, the Greater Indonesian archipelago, and then they spread to, like, open Polynesia, and finally they made what's called the third expansion, the third wave, to Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand. So these became the Maori in New Zealand, the Rapa Nui in Easter Island, and the native Hawaiians in Hawaii. Is there a name for native Hawaiians that I don't know? There probably is, but we don't care because we're the colonial side of America. They found this little tiny nugget of island. About 64 square miles, which is about 2/3 the size of Santa Cruz. It's pretty flat, thin soil, volcanic. It's hot. It's very dry, very little fresh water. Almost no soil, very limited vegetation. Salt spray, because it's always windy, and the ocean's almost always choppy. So there's like salt spray there. If you had a car, it would rust very quickly there. Very little potential to grow food on land, and extreme fishing potential. Surrounded by thousands of miles of open ocean, this is the only thing that comes up off the bottom. Always currents on one part of the island, and there's always wind on one side of the island. And whenever wind hits this side of the island, it comes onshore here and offshore there. And when the wind is pushing the water away, that means water's getting sucked up from the bottom. And cold water that comes off the bottom holds more nutrients, so it's more productive. So there's more like algae and little bugs. So all the fish come over here to eat on the offshore wind side. called upwelling areas. Best fishing on Earth is upwelling. So no matter which way the wind was blowing that day, the Rapa Nui could go fishing. And they were like, hey, that's kind of sweet, because there was like, nobody had been here. And so they were like, oh man, there's a lot of fish out there. From all over the Pacific Ocean, dolphins come to eat fish here. And the Rapa Nui love porpoise. They're their #1 protein source, historically. So they decided to settle down, and one thing that they noticed there was these giant palm trees. I can't show you the giant palm trees, because the giant palm trees, I think you read in the article, right, that they're extinct now? You guys read that? Was that in your article? So there used to be what's called the Easter Island giant palm. And we only know it from fossil remains, but it was really big. Now this is what we call giant palm. These are farmed in Senegal, I believe, or in the Congo. And the ones you see here are little tiny babies. To put it in perspective, the Easter Island ones were even bigger. So the Rapa Nui, when they show up, they're like, holy crap, we can make some big old boats with those. So they were pretty fired up. One thing that everybody knows about Easter Island is about, and you know how that thing went with the trees, by the way, right? One thing that everybody knows about Easter Island was the heads. They're called moi, like M-A-O-I, moi. And these were carved during what's called like the classic Rapa Nui period. So from about 1000 to about 1600. 13 feet tall. They're scattered all over the island. They face away from the ocean. You'll notice that the one on the hill there is looking away from the sea. And they did this because they wanted to show that they were not afraid of invaders. It's like, my soldiers, they don't look out from the castle. They turn their back on you because they're not even afraid. You're not even a threat to us. We turn our back to you. Because the Rapa Nui were badass. Like all the other Polynesians, they had a carving culture. That's true of all Polynesians. They had this one group of Polynesians, anybody remember where this is? I don't know. Where they made these giant coins on the sand. And so if you wanted to like buy the water ball, it's okay, now that's your coin. And they would purchase things by just transferring ownership of statues. Statuary was a show of power, because if you can feed the stone carvers, you must be good at getting food. And so like wealth was measured in the food you could provide, which would be translated into stone carvings that you owned. Religiously, these depict your ancestors. And by the way, they also thank and glorify your ancestors, because ancestors are like benevolent gods that are looking out for you. So you'd say like, no, I've had a really good year fishing because my grandpa's looking out for me, so I'm going to use all these extra fish to feed all the stone carvers to make a statue of Grandpa to say, thanks, Grandpa, and to show everybody Grandpa's got my back and he's a badass. Among the gods, he's powerful. That's why your grandfather can't take care of you, because my grandfather god is beating up on your grandfather, and that's why mine gets a statue. I love Polynesians. Sorry, I'm like really into that. Yeah.
Do you know how long it took to carve each one of those?
Someone might. I don't. I know that. I know how they were carved. I'll show you the quarries where they were made. They were carved in the laying down setup. The 887 were scattered all around the edges. There were like exposed bedrock areas where they carved them like this. And we know that these sort of demonstrate wealth, like rival gangs would face these toward each other to say like, you know, look at how many people are on my side. And so you could walk around the island and figure out who's the big boss, because the big boss has the most statues. Somewhere in the 15th or 16th century, the population topped out at like 15 or 20,000, and the primary social activity was carving statues. There's been this, like, I don't know if you heard that there was like this mystery of the Moai. Like, how did they move these things? They weigh like 20 tons or some absurd giant number. And like, in the archaeology world, this was like more mysterious than the pyramids. Like, how could they do this? You know, lots smaller number of people, no evidence of having slaves to do the rolling stuff. And so this was often seen as like the idea, you build a frame and you put it on rollers, and that's what they use all the trees for, right? That might have even said that in your book, in your reader, right? Did it say that's what they use the trees for?
Yeah.
That is wrong! Because apparently those statues are really heavy, and palm trees are like a bundle of grass. If you've ever chainsawed a palm tree, they're like kind of brittle and frail. They're really tough this way. They can withstand amazing winds and stuff because they're flexible, like a bunch of grass bundled together. But like a bunch of grass, they're kind of brittle. You can smush them really easy. Like if you take a piece of palm tree and you knock it over, like you jump on it, it's like spongy. So this doesn't work. A bunch of nerds have tried it. And they take all their cranes out there, and they get all the nerd audience and nerd scientists and stuff, and it doesn't work. And everybody would ask the Rapa Nui, like there's a few of these dudes left, and be like, so how did your ancestors move the statues? And the Rapa Nui would be like, oh no, bro, they walked. And everybody, like, the anthropological world had this condescending opinion, like, you stupid Indian. Of course they didn't walk. Like, I know that's your myth, but really, come on, tell me. How'd your ancestors move them? And the Rapa Nui would be like, no, bro, they walk. And so there's like books written, like you can go to like Easter Island Rapa Nui textbooks, and they'll talk about the myth of the walking Moai. And then some nerd from MIT was like, hey, you guys, check this out. The best way to move them is to walk them. Like the way you walk a fridge, you know? Like you tip it on one corner, and you walk over and tip it the other way. Like that's actually how they move. And so a whole bunch of archaeologists have had to eat their crow and be like, oh, okay, fine, they actually walk them. Look at that guy's hands, by the way. Never touched a tree in his life, but he solved this. Nerd power. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm just obsessed with that. Like, you guys know I studied anthropology, so that's like classic. So everything sounds nice and everything, but bad news is these guys kind of picked the wrong island. It's like drier and hotter and windier than the regional average. Among Pacific islands, this is probably one of the least habitable Pacific islands. Because it's got so much ocean around, it can't build up enough humidity or enough heat to make rain. So it's like really arid. It's just not a good choice. And then, like, they did bring some domesticated animals, but the domesticated animals ate all the seeds that provided for all the birds. And so there were all these other types of little ecological mistakes that were made. And, you know, they cut down all the trees, and so you heard about that. But there's a funny thing about cutting down all the trees. Trees block wind, so salt spray all of a sudden covered the whole island and kind of sterilized the soil, so they were even less capable of growing their own food. So there was this, like, snowball effect where, like, one collapse and then another collapse, and the trees and the erosion and the salinization. And by the way, they had, like, El Niños are like this every 5 years, but they also follow a 500-year millennial cycle. And just like we in the Pacific Northwest are entering what's called a 50-year low within a 500 cycle, they got one of those. So they got this extended like half a century of drought that we're like probably in year 5 or 10 of, by the way. I thought you should know. So then they have these fires, and like because of the drought, fires were gnarly, and like burned up all the last grasses, and all of a sudden they're living on this like, big, ashen, dead area. And with no trees, you can't get no fish. So one of the problems with making your trees out of you're making your boats out of palm trees is they only last 1 or 2 years. Palm trees make great boats for a little while. And as their boats all rotted and sank into the ocean, they didn't have any more trees to make any more fishing boats. So instead of going out to the ocean and catching the schools of the pods of dolphin, they were forced to like fish near shore. And so if you look at like the fossil record on the island, there's like porpoise bones and healthy human bones. And then you get like a layer of ground fish, and then like seagulls and pigeons and rats. And then like invertebrates and clams and crabs. And then you get like bones of humans that had diseases and malformation and injuries from arrowheads and hatchets, and showed that the human bones had been carved. Because around 1680 there was this like classic collapse, civil war erupted. The so-called leaders couldn't provide for people anymore. So statuary areas were like abandoned. Like literally, people walked away. They're like, if you can't feed me, you're not boss anymore. I'm out of here. They knocked over each other's statues. In order to hold on to power, the leadership was like, wait, everybody, you guys still work for me. Go kill all them and we'll take their food and then we'll be okay and we can at least eat. So civil warfare breaks out. Eventually people get tired of fighting because they're all starving and nobody's feeding them anyway. So they just start eating each other. This is a very classic recipe. I'll get back to not like human recipe, but I'm just like a social recipe. That you get loss of faith in leadership. Leadership responds in the wrong way. People freak out. They're hungry. They're fighting anyway. And they start eating each other, and that's the end of your society. This sounds like, oh my God, it must be just Easter. This is like the way that societies go down. I used to talk about how there was one of these in the ocean, by the way, but I found out later that's a movie set, so the Rapa Nui didn't do that. There's an insult in the language in Rapa Nui that if you really hate someone, instead of telling them to like F you, you tell them your mother's flesh sticks to my teeth. Like I ate your mom. You know, for a culture that like appreciates their ancestors, that's the worst insult. I ate your mom. There was this Dutch guy named Dutch Admiral Jacob Ragaveen. He's the dude that spotted the island on Easter Sunday in 1722, and that's why it's called Easter Island, because he found it on Easter. And he didn't even stop. He was like, no trees, looks pretty bad. And he just kept going. He like named it, put it on the map, so okay, that's another one, so they just kept going. Then like 50 years later, this James Cook guy came on the island, and there was like a few hundred Indians left, and he said they looked like kicked dogs. He said they were small, lean, timid, and miserable. So he was like, he took a few slaves and he kept going. Then the island was raided by the slave trade that would take guano off islands. So most of the Rapa Nui in the late 1700s, early 1800s became slaves and were lost to the European diseases and, of course, the guano trade. In 1872, the last 100 were like begging for someone to save them, and about 15 years later, Chile said, all right, fine, you can become Chile. So now Rapa Nui are a native tribe of the nation of Chile. And there's a few left. You know, there's like a dude out there who's like the mayor. He's got some number of natives that are still there. He says, our ethnography is one of the poorest in the Pacific, but we still know how to fish. We still know how to track the moon. for guidance in planting. We still know how to find the stars to navigate. And we still have some things to call ourselves Rapa Nui. But we are few. And the story sounds like, oh my God, that's gnarly. That whole thing, like, they really blew it because they were on the island and they didn't know about the trees. But I've got bad news for you. This is like the most common story ever. Like, y'all heard about the Anasazi, like the Four Corners, Native American, like Hopi? So the dudes that built the cliff dwellings. You know, they grew the Three Sisters. Have y'all heard of the Three Sisters? Like beans, corn, and squash, and grew out together because it's like they complement each other, and and so they could store all of the corn and the beans, and they would make a hard squash. And so a lot of their ruins have these like granaries, those round spots, where they would like stash food the way like rodents stash food, so that the whole dry summer and fall they could, you know, keep something to eat. And they had like big round ceremonial things, and like they had the same recipe basically. Agricultural society. They grew a lot in good years. They became a very large group. The Anasazi language group basically covers almost the entire American Southwest at some time in history. They had all these independent groups that would trade with each other and defend each other. They would share food with the center, and then the center would share military support against raiding parties from outside. Classic nation state. They got huge. Then they came into one of those very extended droughts. Climate always changes. And so they got hit by a drought, and the population was stressed, and agriculture kind of suffered. They scrambled to grow more food, so they cut down all the trees along the river so they could make more farms, and of course the erosion during the flood took away all their farmland. Same recipe, by the way, the trees and the erosion, that's also the same. And basically, all the parts of the nation became independent. They lost faith in their central leadership. They fought with each other. Infighting, loss of faith, civil warfare, collapse of social society, cannibalism, and that society also disappeared. You find a generation of bones that are full of shavings where people took the meat off the human. Many of you know about the Mayans because perhaps you know about this little place called Central America. The Mayans built these like majestic temples in the tropics. They carved out roads. They had like unbelievable ceremonial sporting events, and again these like giant monuments to their great leaders. Some of you have heard of like Tikal and other like really famous Mayan areas, and wouldn't you know it, same crap. One of the largest empires in the history of the Americas. Lots of debate about details, but there's a few things we know. They had too much agriculture. They leveled out the forest, and by creating all of those terraces, we know that their forests were basically washed away in the rain, because you need trees to anchor the soil, and when you make flat stuff, the water comes in really fast and pushes the dirt off the end and then carries it all down. We know this because they have found lakes. They have found meadows in the tropics, and everybody goes, how can there be a meadow in the tropical rainforest? That's because that used to be a lake, and it filled up with soil. And when you dig through the meadow, at the very bottom, you find all of these layers of grain and so on that were being grown by the Mayans. The farm soil from the hillsides all filled up the lakes and became meadows in the tropics. So when they needed to focus on producing food, instead they focused on warfare. People lost faith in their leadership. They defaced each other's statues again. So there's all this study about Mayan statues. I have seen Mayan statues where the face got hammered off. More than 5 million people living in a space smaller than Colorado in primitive agriculture, by the way. So there was all this raiding. Hey, guess what? Climate change, because it always changes. And the inaction of the leadership led to a loss of faith, more civil war. They ate each other. And by the way, the Mayans literally gave up on Mayan culture. They walked into the forest. Like, hunting parties came back to use the ruins later because they were like, F this is bad mojo. And they went back to being essentially hunter-gatherers. That's an amazing story, to have a culture that people quit. Some of you have heard of the Vikings? Like, amazing power. Same thing with the Vikings, same recipe, same cannibalism. Climate change, attacked by outsiders when they were weak, same thing. And then we look at this and we're like, oh yeah, everything's cool, right? Let me just remind you of a couple of unfortunate things. Look, we are running out of trees. We do have really bad erosion. Our ability to provide food has decreased. We as Americans are losing faith in our leadership. An increasing number of Americans, quote, have lost faith in American leadership. Oh yeah, and climate is changing faster than it ever has. I'm not saying that we're like, that it's too late, but in the recipe for societal collapse, we've definitely ticked off some of those first ingredients. You know, some societies don't collapse. Some societies last a really long time. By the way, the things that they have in common is they focus on feeding people, not on fighting people. I just sort of want to put it out there that the stakes is high, so to speak. I don't know if you all know that song. Like, I don't want to eat my neighbor's mom. Like, I want to keep fishing and like eating wild mushrooms and having like super dank organic food from farmers market. And I want everybody else to have that luxury too, because if not, maybe they'll eat my mom, and that's not cool either. Sorry, is that eating the mom thing grossing you out? Yeah. Okay, I thought you were hanging your head. Okay, yeah. I guess I made my point. Anybody want to talk more about this? Period 2 is like 2 minutes longer, so I got 2 minutes to go. Alright. Don't forget 1.1 is due tomorrow. Any questions about that? Yeah?
What's your YouTube channel?